It is a glorious morning, a little windy here on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. I couldn't ask for better company to revisit the events of Passion Week. Dr. Craig Evans, New Testament scholar, is enjoying this with me. I hope you can see the Dome of the Rock between us, just actually over my shoulder. In 1981, I had the awesome privilege of going into that building. Not possible today, Dr. Evans, but we know what was there.
Well, we do, yes. And where you see the Golden Dome, that's where the Jewish temple was, the temple that had been rebuilt by Herod the Great himself. And it was a landmark. It was one of the wonders of the ancient world. The disciples commented on it about how beautiful it was. And what we're looking at now would have been very much the view that Jesus himself would have had here on the Mount of Olives, he and his disciples looking at that holy mount. So we are in a very significant place.
The week really begins with the triumphal entry, and I never tire of seeing the Golden Gate. Walled up. I don't know if that's one of the obstacles to the Lord's return.
Yeah, well, maybe. That and, of course, the cemetery in front of it, but I don't think that's going to interfere at all.
Why the cemetery? Explain.
Well, you know, if there's a cemetery there and you can see the gravestones and markers, you can't then build a road through there. And who's going to, especially from a Jewish point of view and attitudes about corpse impurity, who's going to walk through the gate there, even if the gate's open? So I find that rather interesting. This is a human barrier, an attempt by people to say no to the Messiah. That's not going to stop him.
It is not. And maybe a poignant moment that would be good to reflect on here, because there's a little church just off your shoulder, and it marks a moment that I think is very powerful. Jesus wept over Jerusalem as he approached it, and he specifically says in Luke 19 verse 44, because you did not recognize it when God visited you.
Yes, that's very true. And in fact, that church that you see is called Dominus Flevit, which is Latin for the Lord wept. And that's referring to that very passage you just mentioned, Luke 19. Jesus was on the Mount of Olives looking down on this holy site, the Temple Mount, and he knew what was coming. And it broke his heart. He wept over the city. He knew that although this was the moment of the Lord's visitation, a very important word, by the way, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, the very word that occurs in the book of Ruth, which meant bread had once again been provided at Bethlehem. Here that word, ironically, in my view, reoccurs in the New Testament. God has visited his people, and his people don't recognize it, and Jesus knows what those consequences will be. It breaks his heart. He weeps over the city. And that little chapel there, beautiful location, marks that place.
Of course, part of the reason the Jews did reject their Messiah, he didn't meet their expectations. And it's reflected even in his entry into the city on a colt, a baby donkey.
That's right. And what Jesus was doing, he's following the example of David's son Solomon. You can read all about it in 1 Kings chapter 1. He enters the city in humility, not on a stallion, not as a warrior, but as a humble king. And of course, that's what Zechariah the prophet foretells, that when Israel's true king comes, he will enter the city in humility on this donkey. And it's right there, and we're looking at the very place. We can imagine the throngs greeting Jesus with the palm branches and laying their garments on the road before him as he entered the city. It would have been a thrilling moment.
But he will come as that conquering king on a white horse. Think that day is soon, Dr. Evans?
I don't see how it could be much further off, the way the world is and the way things are. I mean, shouldn't be predicting things. We're told not to predict things, but at the same time, though, Jesus commands his disciples to be prepared, and we want to be prepared and we want to be ready.
Well, from this vantage point, the Lord wept, knowing the things to come. And he would weep again in a garden not far from here. When we visit you next, it'll be from the Garden of Gethsemane. Join us on our journey through Passion Week.